So I have to admit, this is always a challenging topic to preach on. And it's tough because even just defining the word adultery is difficult. What one person thinks of as adultery is possibly very different from what somebody else thinks of as adultery. As a teen, I remember kind of, not speaking of this with very much knowledge of how sacred marriage was or how holy marriage was. And the joke around all of us teenagers, well, it doesn't count if they're in a different zip code. Does anybody know those types of things where we just kind of have a silly expression? That's something I've seen in movies. Well, we can make up reasons why this isn't really committing adultery because, well, this thing or that thing. And we can have different excuses. And sadly, I think we all would have our different excuses at some point, either on a natural level or perhaps on a spiritual level. But what we're here to do today is not to get bogged down in feeling guilty. This is one of the hardest things about this topic because it touches so deeply to the source of what we are as human beings. The Lord tells us that this is the most pervasive atmosphere or aura that emanates from Him, is this desire to be one with another human being. This desire to join together what is good and true, what is loving and wise, so that we can be useful, productive, joyful, creative. It takes bringing those things together to make something. The Lord says this is the source of all happiness. All happiness. You like sports and you love it, somehow it's connected back to marriage love. I don't know exactly how we can make that line. I'm sure we could. But if we start off with that essential truth, that all happiness comes through this one atmosphere, and that the Lord made it the most pervasive atmosphere. What does that tell us about what He wants for us? He wants happiness. The greatest kind of happiness. The kind of happiness that when two people come together, it can produce new life. And then we're put into this world where we have that atmosphere, that same pervasive atmosphere, and it affects everything variously. So we have this force almost on the inside of us where the Lord is drawing us towards a concept of being married, of being one with another, of bringing goodness and truth together. And then there's a general sphere that goes out to everything. And we read in the doctrines that this applies to all animals, even down into the vegetable kingdom. And it says it's on a mechanical level on the lowest or the mineral kingdom that you can find this marriage. We're told that the entirety of the Word has the marriage of goodness and truth as the most obvious thing. And yet we can go to the Word and find very few stories of quality marriages. So there's some issues that we've got to deal with. And it's hard. If we all grow up in a world where there is a certain culture of marriage, and that's a very varying culture, depending on where you are in the world, what country you live in, what religion you grow up around, what people you're around, all of that goes into influence what our concepts of marriage are. And we have civil institutions in different countries that say, these are the boundaries. If we're going to make civil laws that say marriage is something in our society, these are our restrictions of what we call marriage. And already this is going to be hard because what does that mean we're leaving out? Every society has something. Every religion kind of seems to restrict things even more. And if you get into most of those religions, they restrict us to one person. All of these restrictions, why is the Lord restricting us? And this is one of the biggest things that came out, what we call the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. Why is this all this? Churches are just trying to stomp out sex. And so there's pushback, right? We have a culture where there's lots of back and forth, and it's a confusing time to really know what marriage is. And I think we're all there. One of the hardest things to do here is to try to say, well, of all of those people that are in this culture of confusion, I am the one who got the right answer. I'm the one who figured it out. Or this is the right church that tells you exactly what marriage is in the right way. Or our country has the laws right because it allows these forms and doesn't allow those. Who draws the lines and where? That's the question we're addressing today. And I'm excited about this because I think that it helps us to see that the Lord isn't actually restricting us. Oops. These are lots of different fields we're going to get to. Because when you aren't married yet, you're generally playing the field. We all know that expression. We're playing the field. When we are born into this world, there's a very wide field. The atmosphere of conjugal love pervades all things, and it affects us on multiple levels. In heaven, we're told that the highest angels have the most pure sense of marriage love. The next angels kind of have not as pure marriage love, and it goes down to where we got human beings who can have absolute pure marriage love or not so pure marriage love, or it can become something that we call in the doctrines carnal or just purely bodily. Now, as we look at the field that we're playing in our universe, there are lots of things that we could say, let me try to couple with that thing. Let me partner with whatever that thing is or that person is. And I'm using that word thing purposely because it is that universal where we're talking about inanimate objects. Let's try coupling with that. How well does seed grow in stony ground? It generally doesn't. We might have an excitement for the idea of marriage and the happiness that can come in marriage, but if we're going for things that really are inanimate, we're not going to find real, reciprocal relationship. It's not going to do it. It's not going to develop into anything. So the idea is there, but it withers away quickly. This is also seeking marriage in any ideas that are false. We don't have to define what's false yet, but in general, the stony ground is any ideas that are false. They are not going to produce the love that we're seeking. What about the wayside? I think about this idea of love and marriage being seeded into our lives, and then we go, ooh, they're beautiful. How much do we get distracted by the things alluring us away? Pulling us away from that truth that we should be seeking a good marriage where we're taking away those distractions, where we're, yes, confining ourselves, limiting ourselves to only consider our own spouse that way. We're not going to find happiness in marriage if we're seeking it outside of that source. What about our thorny ground here? Things choke out marriage. When the natural stuff gets more important than the spiritual, and that's all it's about, we're not going to progress in a relationship of our spirits or of our souls. We're going to get distracted by the challenges that we face in the bedroom. The Lord doesn't give us restrictions to say, you can only have this of many options. He's saying, don't look in these places. Look where there's good ground. The places where you're willing to do the work, to till up the parts of our lives that make ourselves willing to change, to hear a message from another human being and help it grow. And the Lord says that that produces sometimes 100-fold, sometimes 60, and sometimes 30. Still playing the field here. This is the wheat and the tares. So let's say we've got that good field, because everybody in that story says, wait, didn't you sow good seed into this field, sir? He says, an enemy did this. So hopefully you can see our nice, good rows here. And our blue are our good wheat. And we've got some tares growing up in here. Even in that, what we think the Lord is leading us to, we're going to come to find that there are things in our understanding of what we think marriage is supposed to be like, how we're supposed to treat our spouse, what it is. There are tares in there. Even in this good ground, even in a good marriage, we're going to come across issues where we need to change. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to stop, fix everything, and make it perfect on the day that we get married. Is everything perfect on the day you get married? Never. Allow it to grow. As things grow up, we'll know the difference between them. And yeah, marriage can be hard work, but as a couple, you can identify those things and go, that's a tear. That's a tear. We need to tear that out. One more field. Kingdom of heaven is like a man who has a treasure and he buries it in a field and he sells all that he has and buys that field. Now, I hope this is a drawing that makes some sense. This is our original playing field. Everything in the universe. If we restrict ourselves inwards towards, away from false ideas of marriage, away from selfish things, into a category where we allow not our own ideas of marriage to define marriage, but into a box where it's, hey, this is God's definition of marriage from what I understand. With our children's talk, we talked about the nose ring and the bracelets. When we come to find a partner, these are essentially important. Our idea of God, our perception of what is good from Him. Do we have an agreement with that other person? Do we have the similar vision of what marriage is? Are we going to work with that vision to do what we need to do, to live that way, to be faithful to each other? Whatever your principles of marriage are, we're going to do that. And we're going to do it not because it's our idea, because it's God's idea. That's why they're gold. Marriage is a very complex thing, and when it's just one person versus one person, there's never going to be a winner. But when both are looking towards God, there's a way forward. So we can see, hopefully, this little arrow going up and in, and we're narrowing our view down to a place where I'm going to buy a field, and my wife is going to have this field, and there's this common place in the middle where this is all the Lord's work, bringing us together, and where that comes together is our marriage. We have bought the same field, the same treasure is there, and it's a treasure from the Lord. The hard part about our conversations on marriage is that when we step outside of our own marriage and start worrying about others, we can lose focus on our work in our own marriage. And we can often try to tell somebody about a part of the field that's not theirs. There are huge challenges in discussing this in church, in society, in any form. But one of the things that I find awesome about the writings is it gives us a little thing that says, you know what makes pure conjugal love different from even impure conjugal love in the spiritual heaven? What? The highest angels have conjugal love proper. Lower angels, we're told it's not as pure. Interesting. What is the defining factor? I'm going to read from conjugal love number 224. Where a truly conjugal love exists, this atmosphere is received by the wife and by the husband solely through the wife. It is a secret unknown today that in the case of people who are in a state of truly conjugal love, this atmosphere is received by the husband solely through his wife. And yet it is not really a secret, because it's possible for a man who's about to be married or just recently married to be aware of it, because he's not then affected with a conjugal warmth by whatever emanates from his fiancée or new bride. He is not at the same time being attracted by that emanating from others. A husband's receiving the conjugal atmosphere solely through his wife is the mark by which truly conjugal love is recognized and differentiated from a conjugal love that is illusory, feigned, or cold. What this is saying is that even though we have a draw and an attraction towards a lot, the wellspring of love, the source of happiness that comes in marriage comes when we focus all of our love energy on our spouse. That when anything draws us away from, that's a feeling I should only be giving to my partner, we need to draw it back in. What does that include? It's going to include pornography. I'm sorry. It's going to include extramarital affairs. It's going to include licentiousness. It's going to include a lot of things. Some of them, culture will say, yep, that's wrong too. And some of it, religions will say, that's wrong. Some of it is just stuff that some couples say is wrong and we think is okay. There's a definition of our marriage, hopefully, that is also defined by the Lord. And this is what we're working towards. How are we allowing the Lord to draw both ourselves and our partner into this one field that when we find that treasure, we will sell everything else that we have and buy that field? Because that's where we're going to do the rest of our work. The Lord tells us that conjugal love is like a wellspring. It's a fountain springing into eternal life. And that adultery is like taking that spring and pinching it like a hose, and then covering over in slime. When we think about adultery as a topic, we can try to define, this is adultery or that's adultery, but the truth is, adultery is simply anything that takes us outside of this marriage relationship, that one person that we're going to be with forever. Everything that's drawing us outside of that is some form of adultery. It's adding something impure to this mixture. Now, we can feel guilty about the way we're allured by our senses, by our flesh, into those different things, into the arguments that we have with each other. But can we, just in our own marriage, focus on that oneness? And in the meantime, here's the most important lesson I want to get across this morning. That as we're trying to figure out the difference between what's outside of our field and the one that God gave or is planning to sell us or give to us, as we're trying to figure out those differences, we don't hold the Lord and His Word in contempt. The Lord is the source of all marriage. And if the Word is the Lord, and this is the way He shares with us about marriage, the last thing that we can do if we want that marriage is to hold anything that comes from God in contempt. It might mean we go, I don't understand how this works right now. I don't understand how this fits this teaching, but if I believe this is from the Lord for myself, I'm going to live this way, and I'm going to have mercy on others because I'm just as confused. This is a hard path. But every person has their right to define their marriage with their couple, with their partner, as they see fit. Is that a marriage in the Lord? I don't know. Is the Lord central in their marriage? Then probably. It's not our place to judge another person's marriage, but if a religion or a church or a society or a person defines, this is what I believe marriage is, that is so vitally important, because that's what we need to advertise. To say to our future partner or the one that we're with, this is what I believe marriage is and what I'm striving for with all of my heart. And if we have a common ground, then we come together. The parts that aren't in agreement fall away. The tares are separated from the wheat. And that's something the Lord does. It's not something that we do for each other. So as we're approaching this week, thinking about the difficulties of, we probably all have challenges in our sex life and the way we feel with our bodies and our ideas of what is marriage. But can we put the Lord's truth as this is the source? The Lord is trying to point us in the direction of here's where you can find that happiness. It's in a beautiful marriage with your future partner. It's just going to be one of you, and it's going to be me, and we're going to make this awesome. That's a beautiful thing to strive for, which is why this church is so strong about marriage. We want that happiness to fill the universe as that atmosphere fills the universe from the Lord. Please rise.